All-stars, one of them a legend in her own right. You're looking at Ann Wolbert Burgess. She is an internationally recognized pioneer in the assessment and treatment of victims of trauma and abuse, and the author of A Killer by Design, Murders, Mind Hunters, and My Quest to Decipher the Criminal Mind. Among her many awards and accolades in 2016, she was named a living legend by the American Academy of Nursing. This resume, I could go on for 3 days. She also worked with the FBI Academy special agents to study serial offenders and the links between child abuse, juvenile delinquency, and subsequent perpetration. You know the super successful Netflix show Mind Hunters, about the FBI's first day of criminal profiling. She worked with the real life agents that show is based on, and unlike my cardboard cutout mother here, Carmela, who is not in person and who has a few years on you, Mom, is out here working diligently. My Mary Burcato, a Columbia University clinical psychologist, researcher, and author in the areas of early psychosis, violence, and other serious psychopathology. He studies, among other things, how violent thoughts and actions emerge in psychotic versus non-psychotic persons. That's an important thing to know when you're looking for a killer. He is the co-author of The New Evil, Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime, and The Handsome Man. As far as we know, not a ton of new updates coming from police outside of the fact that they are now redirecting the tip line directly to the FBI because they're getting so many tips about this Hyundai Elantra that they put a bulletin out for yesterday. It's a 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra, which investigators say they believe the occupants of this vehicle may have critical information to share regarding this case. First to the legend, Anne. How big a deal is this that police are finally putting out a possible suspect vehicle?
Well, a car is certainly a good piece of evidence, if indeed it turns out to be, because they can trace it down. There are all kinds of ways that they can work that. And police are very good, or law enforcement, at cars. I remember working with the behavioral science unit agents that they would almost be able to profile your car from looking at one of the suspects. So that's, I think, I think it's good that they've got that, if indeed it turns out to be productive.
Now, Gary, you wrote co-authored a book called The New Evil, Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime. I mean, if you can break it down, how do you think these violent crimes have evolved? And if you had how would you paint the portrait potentially of this killer or killers in Idaho?
Well, this is you're opening up a whole can of worms with this question, because the point of that book is really twofold. The first half of it is to talk about the idea that there's a very wide spectrum of motives for committing crimes, which I must say in earlier generations stuck lower to the lower in the scale on average. And you're saying a lot more of the higher up stuff on the scale, which takes a lot more change in personality, audacity, narcissism, sadism, cruelty, things like that. I swear, if you use that scale as like a thermometer of how a culture is doing, the culture is getting worse. But I would say that the point of the first half of that book is the idea that there are many people that would commit very heinous acts because of situational factors that they would not repeat, because it is not really an integral part of their personality to do it. It's happening out of circumstance, desperation, the particular relationship they're in, trauma, whatever. But then as you move up the scale, you start to move through different degrees of narcissism, then into psychopathy, and then into sadism. You start to see that the personality really figures into the motive, so that then the crimes don't make as much sense, because you can't say, well, there's a clear discernible motive here beyond some thing that just must be in the person's fantasies. Like, for example, in this Idaho case, there's no overt sexual assault, So then you say, well, what would be the point of doing this? Well, there must be a point. Most people don't just do things for no reason, except for that small fraction of people who do things like this because they're profoundly disturbed or on drugs or alcohol. So that the question is, what would the motive be? And what makes that a little tricky when we look at modern crime, particularly since the 1960s in the Western world, is that a lot of things are an expression of sexual frustration, an outlet for sexual frustration, whether it's overt or not overt. And Anne, for example, was one of the people who really helped to elucidate that sex crimes don't have to necessarily involve overtly sexual things.
Within the last hour, Moscow police announced they'll have another press conference to give an update on the investigation. That'll take place tomorrow at 3 p.m. We will be streaming that press conference live on krem.com. In the meantime, MPD released new information from the investigation within the last 24 hours, dispelling online conspiracies and confirming some details from the scene. Here's what we know right now. The Latah County coroner says the 4 students were likely asleep at the time. Some had defensive wounds and each victim was stabbed multiple times. Authorities found no sign of sexual assault. Moscow police say at this point in the investigation, they don't believe the 2 surviving roommates or the man seen standing near a local food truck were involved in the murders. They have not released the identity of the 911 caller.
That a person can express those frustrations in butchery or mutilation without any real clear indication. And then the second half of that book is really just to get into the idea that there are crimes that couldn't happen in previous generations because the technology didn't exist, like the internet or the microwave, for example, which was used for murder almost immediately upon its invention, right, to kill an infant. As soon as something is invented, someone uses it in a new way, right? The metaverse, Anne and I, something we've been talking about recently, is pretty much a matter of time until it's used for crime, right? People do that. But there are also new evil in the sense that some crimes involve cultural disinhibition, changes in what people will permit and tolerate, so that as the culture changes, the likelihood of these more audacious crimes increases.
A new twist in the slaying of those 4 University of Idaho students. We're learning now that just after 3 in the morning, police got a call about a disturbance outside a frat house, just a short walk from the crime scene. The murders happened not long after that call. But is there a connection? Jim Murray reports.
A mysterious 911 call sent cops rushing to the street the night the 4 University of Idaho students were murdered. Police logs from that fateful night show a disturbance in this field outside the Sigma Chi fraternity. The Moscow, Idaho police daily activity log reveals officers responded to an alcohol offense at 3:01 a.m. That's right around the time police say the murders were committed. How close is that frat house to the murder scene? Let me show you. Here's the frat house. You walk across the street and right through these apartment buildings. You then continue up this narrow path, and then you walk up these wooden stairs. And there you are. Right at the house. We spoke with Brian Enton, senior national correspondent for the cable news channel NewsNation, which is airing a 1-hour special on the case Sunday.
There's a lot of fraternity and sorority houses, and an alcohol call wouldn't be out of the norm. But it's still just weird to think about the fact that the police were so close to this house around the time the murders were happening.
Welcome back to the Lunch Show here on Law and Crime. I'm Anjanette Levy, coming to you live from Moscow, Idaho, where the investigation into the murder of 4 University of Idaho students seems to be heating up, with a little bit of information about a vehicle that police are looking for, and they want to speak to the people who were in that vehicle that was in the area of the homicides on the morning they occurred. Of course, those 4 victims, Kaylee Gonsalves, Maddie Mogan, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle, 4 young people, their lives snuffed out within minutes. And it's just a horrific, horrific crime that has rocked this small community. We are taking your questions. Allison from YouTube, or it might be Alacan, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. Did they interview peeps from the frat house? And let me tell you, I will answer that question. I'll take that one. Yes, they have. And I've spoken to people at the Sigma Chi house where Ethan was a member and where Xana and Ethan attended the party that night at the Sigma Chi house on November 12th, just a short distance away from the house where the murders occurred. Ethan lived at the frat house, Xana at her home on King Road with Maddie and Kaylee, and those people have been interviewed, and we've been told by the president of Sigma Chi that they are cooperating with law enforcement and have told them everything they know. So that's what we've been told.
This morning, police zeroing in on the movements of two of the University of Idaho victims, Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin, the night they were murdered, looking specifically at the hours between 9 p.m. and 1:45 a.m. when the couple was believed to be at Ethan's fraternity.
Why are you looking for more information specifically about where Xana and Ethan were in regards to his fraternity house?
That actually seems to be one of the larger areas that we don't have a lot of information in. And so being able to locate what they did that night, to maybe who they contacted, maybe any routes that they took home, that would be important for the investigation.
Xana and Ethan stabbed to death less than a block away at Xana's home, along with Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogan, who were found on the top floor. Two roommates survived, along with Kaylee's dog, seen in this TikTok video. Authorities now say the dog was found inside the home, but in a separate room from the victims.
How important is the behavior of the dog in your investigation?
We don't believe that there was any appearance of forced entry into the home. And as well, at this time, we have not determined if the dog was inside the residence during the murders or not. What we do know is that the dog was inside when officers arrived. The dog did not appear to have any evidence on it.
Police also addressing information about the victim's manner of death after Kaylee's father said he learned his daughter's wounds were much more severe than her friends, fearing Kaylee was the target.
Please don't be my child, that's the target.
Police telling ABC News they have not provided the family with that information.
Authorities also telling me they're not attempting to refute what the family is saying. Ultimately, they want to protect the integrity of this investigation. But as time marches on, Steve tells us he's been approached by a private investigator to help solve this case.
Ohio crime is awful, but one hates to admit that you could look at the front page of the newspaper over the course of a year and it almost starts to become a common kind of story to hear these kinds of things. But 60 years ago, it would have been like the crime of the century.
I think you said Ohio, but I think you meant Idaho.
Idaho, yes. It becomes like it would have been the crime of the century. Now it's,
His parents clutched hands as charges were announced in the death of 20-year-old Bowling Green State University student Stone Foltz after a fraternity initiation.
And it is alleged that the new members, almost all being underage, were provided a bottle of high alcohol content liquor.
8 members of Pi Kappa Alpha now facing charges ranging from felony involuntary manslaughter to misdemeanor hazing after the prosecutor says they encouraged Foltz and other pledges to drink the entire bottle.
Hi, someone that we know is non-responsive. He drank alcohol, like a lot of alcohol.
The prosecutor says the sophomore business major had a blood alcohol level almost 5 times the legal limit and was found by roommates after fraternity brothers dropped him off. He died 3 days later.
Well, if you've reached this far, I appreciate you. I am Roz of Roz Night, Squeeze the Quo, and I just wanted to take a look here on YouTube and what Gary was saying on the amount of this kind of new evil that has come out where it's on the news more frequently, and even though that it's on the news more frequently, it seems to be this uninhibitedness about it happening, and that kind of demonstrates where our culture is going. I believe what he is talking about is fraternities and hazing. And I'm just going to scroll through here while I talk to show you the amount of news just on hazing. And there's hazing, that's older, that's pre-COVID, but even post-COVID, you're going to see that it ends up. But here, fraternity pledges describe their worst hazing experience. And, well, that's The Onion, so that's not factual. But right here, a year ago, arrest made an alleged fraternity hazing death a year ago. And when we think about it, this is post-COVID. And post-COVID, this is 2022 when this happened, about a year ago. 4 people were murdered in their home on an off-campus sorority house where 3 of those girls, females, were in a sorority at one point, and 2 of them were in a sorority, and they survived. The 3 who were not did not. The 2 that did survive were in a sorority. Ethan was in a fraternity at the time, but he was dating Xana, who was no longer in a sorority, which I don't know the rules and regulations of Greek life, but I want to say that was not status quo. I'm sure a lot of people want to say that the rules have loosened because of COVID, but I don't think they loosened that quickly. And one of the content creators found out that one of the noise complaints was made by a nearby sorority. So that says a lot about what the surrounding Greek life homes were feeling about 1122 King Road. And Gary does talk about the perpetrator and how he did have a target. It was meticulous. It was thought out, but it had to be someone that knew of the place. And I'm thinking it was Xana and Ethan. And the reason why even Steve G said, he didn't have to go upstairs, but Gary said that once he did his target, other people are going to get it as well. And it could be for whatever reason. It looks like someone they know, or I'm thinking maybe it's because Jack Jacor, her ex-boyfriend, who she broke up with 3 weeks prior, he was in a fraternity. I want to say the same one, but don't quote me on that. And I'm sure there was some underlying anger with it, especially when she went out with someone else while going to school there. I'm sure that sent quite the message. That was not status quo. I'll be interested to see if anyone finds out who the male she dated. It was only one date. What her mother said, that he talked very vulgar to her and she stopped seeing him right then and there. But it'd be interesting to know if he was part of a different fraternity. And I just wanted to bring that up real quick. I'm a visual learner and I'm an abstract thinker, so once he said that, I started visualizing, what he was saying. And I want to say it's about fraternity hazing. And it's interesting to see that once this happened on 11/13, that the fraternity was looked at, but not really. And it has not really been talked about since then, which speaks volumes to me. As I stated prior, I got my master's in criminal justice on victims. I will be working on a video for the myths of stalking and intimate partner violence, which is called nowadays, not so much domestic violence, but it kind of encompasses family, relationships, intimate partner, and the myths that go on with that. As if you were listening to that one video with stalking, I touched on Lauren at the University of Utah, which ESPN unbeknownst to me. 2 weeks prior, when I posted that, 2 weeks prior, they just did a documentary on what happened there, because she was a student athlete. She was in track and field, and she was very good at hurdles. And they went ahead and got footage, they got 911 calls, and she did everything perfectly the way she was supposed to, and nothing happened. And it kind of reminds me of what Steve and Christy were saying, as well as her sister Alicia said. They did everything they were supposed to do. They did everything perfectly. So it kind of sounds like they may have reached out, but we don't know. It may come out in the future. If you have any information about that, please let me know. Please like, subscribe if you like this type of, and I use the papers as well, which I feel is important. So you get professionals doing research who are taking the time to look at the data and put it together and are doing it for the right reasons, so that these students and anyone else can get help, or to know that what it means to be stalked and what it means to be in an intimate partner violent situation. Because if you just rely on media to tell you, it is not factual. They just tell you what needs to be told in order to do X, Y, and Z. So again, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video.
Yeah, and what I will also add, because I think we're going to wind up revisiting this conversation, is that I and a colleague, Rocky Burgess at Columbia, were the co-creators of the Columbia Mass Murder Database, that's the largest database of mass murder, to our knowledge, ever compiled. And this is a mass murder. This Idaho case is a mass murder. And I think we really have to understand it from that perspective. Although it has a lot of qualities of like a lot of other offenses that it's tempting to get into, I think we really have to understand that this is somebody who committed a mass murder, right? Which according to some definitions is 3 or more victims in the same place, same time. And other definitions is 4 people, same place at the same time or more. By either definition, we're looking at a mass murder. So just to put those things out there, but I think this is really going to come down to motive, and I bet it's a decidedly modern one.
Do you think this killer has killed before, if you had to guess?
I think he has killed animals before. I have no doubt about that. Whether he has killed a human, I don't think so. I did want to say.
Welcome back again. If you made it this far, thank you very much. I am Roz of Roz Knight, Squeeze the Quo, and I just want to go over what Gary was saying. Here's the, when he's talking about him and his partner, I want to say it's this guy right here, have developed the Columbia Mass Murder Database, which is the only one that is known of here in the U.S. I find that kind of interesting, and that not the FBI or anyone else has done it, but they took the initiative, and I kind of respect anyone that has done that, knowing that there isn't one, and they are starting to do it themselves because it needs to be done. So here is his original paper of the Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, and this was sent to the Journal of Forensic Sciences. It was received on August 9th of 2022, and which I find interesting, and then it was accepted October 17th. If you remember anything about the videos, or the body cam, the one was on October 16th. And I just find that fascinating. And then the other video cams, the body cams, were September 1st and 2nd that we are aware of. So moving forward, here he is, Gary. And as I said in my other videos, the importance of knowing where and why this research is done. And the funding came from Elizabeth K. Dollard. And again, they received a grant. The New York State Office of Mental Health received a grant to do this. And he is part of the Department of Psychiatry in New York as well. So the abstract is just looking into identifying consistent patterns to see if actual severe mental illness is a reliable predictive indicator. And they did this by looking at 82 incidences to see if it is. 82 is a fair amount of incidences of mass murder. And as he says, mass murder is either 3 or 4, depending on who you're talking to. This particular case is 4. So it is considered a mass murder. And as he looks and sees, as he was saying prior, it's more of a predominantly a U.S. problem, not so much in other countries. And if you see my other video, happened pretty much after the women's movement happened and women started getting rights in the 60s and 70s and then up into the 90s. And now we're looking at fraternities doing more hazing, and more deaths have happened throughout the years, pre-COVID and post-COVID. So looking at this paper, and the highlights here is mass school murders are largely perpetrated by individuals without a history of psychotic symptoms. So that is something that's very important to look into, because the media and talking heads like to say, well, they were severely mentally ill, they were bipolar, schizophrenic, severe depression. And this paper is looking to see if that is an actual factor or not. And as I said, 3 or 4 individuals. And they're more focusing on firearms, but also looking into the use without. And they also looked at about bullying to see if that was a factor, because the media was saying, well, they were bullied and that's why they did that. But in 2002, the U.S. Secret Service and U.S. Department of Education highlighted several key findings in their study of 37 school attackers, but they did not involve a specific number of fatalities. They didn't say if it was 1, 3, or 4, which is really important. So they dropped the ball there. That it was noted that while many perpetrators felt bullied or persecuted by others, there is no reliable profile of individuals who commit such acts because of that. So there you go. Let's see. And in their analysis, we separately examined those who used firearms, such as mass shooters, and those who did not, mass murderers who did not use firearms. They use other variables. And here is their method, along with using the Columbia Mass Murder Index. They got those 82 murder cases, and here are the statistics with that. What they found is mostly Caucasians was the large majority, and it was 100% males. Right here. As we move further down, this gives you the description of the sample. The variable is the male, female, no transgender or unknown, unknown, the race, the age, location, and the fatalities. And they looked at the history of psychotic symptoms. So here is that right here. And another factor which could be brought into the effect here in the Idaho case is recreational drug use, alcohol misuse, because it was stated by several people that it was a party house. It was an off-campus sorority home. There was parties there, and a lot of foot traffic. And then here's the discussion. And this looks into mass school murders not involving firearms. So stabbing right here. A spear, bayonet, driving car into victims intentionally, slashing, arson, explosives. What I find interesting here is that they do not use hands, physical bodies. Was that used? Was this a fight of some sorts? Although public discourse often centers around the role of severe mental illness in academic settings, our data do not support this supposition. It is only in a minority of cases. So it does happen, but it's such a small amount that it's not used as a talking point, which is what they like to do. It is notable, however, that psychotic symptoms were more prevalent among mass murders involving school, college, and university settings who use methods other than firearms. And this is what we're talking about here. And that mass shooters in academic settings are often, but not always, students or recent students who tend to be adolescents or young adults. Okay, and these are actual students there that we know of who actually did it. I mean, they're saying it's Brian Koberger, but he did not shoot that we know of. We're told it was his stabbing. But apparently, it's unclear even with that. So I want to go ahead and look and see what psychosis is. And I just went on to the National Institute of Mental Health, which is a great place to go to just to get a quick understanding, a quick overview. And what is psychosis? Psychosis refers to a collection of symptoms, It's not just one thing. A collection of symptoms that affect the mind, where there has been some loss of contact with reality. During an episode of psychosis, a person's thoughts and perceptions are disrupted, and they may have difficulty recognizing what is real and what is not. Who develops? It's difficult to know the number, but it often begins in a young adulthood and when a person is in their late teens to early 20s. So how people can experience when they're younger or older. And what are the signs and symptoms? People with psychosis typically experience delusions, false beliefs, for example, hallucinations, hearing voices, but however, they'll often show changes in their behavior before psychosis develops. Behavior warnings and signs of it include suspiciousness, paranoid ideas, uneasy with others, trouble thinking clearly, logically, withdrawing socially, unusually or overly intense ideas, strange feelings, decline. This is a huge one. Decline in self-care and personal hygiene. That right there is a big indicator when it comes to the person's not being stable right now, especially disruption of sleep. At first, when I was listening to Steve G talk about, and I did in my other video, if you notice any behavioral changes, or if you see people are not acting like they normally do, and you see these subtle changes, to please say something. At first I thought he was talking about Kaylee with her stalker, but now after looking into more and kind of putting the pieces together here, it could be of someone in their friend group was starting to develop this type of psychosis that everyone was talking about and people were probably fearing. And if you saw my other video with Lauren, and I mentioned in my previous talking points earlier in this video, I don't believe I mentioned, but when ESPN did that documentary, they found that in the footage, the ex-boyfriend who was stalking her was walking around campus in the broad daylight wearing a Marvel costume, head to toe, Marvel costume. I don't know which one it is. I don't know them all, but it's the person who's like all in red. I think Ryan was the one that played him. That's all I know. But that is definitely very concerning, and it's surprising if no one noticed that. Is that normal behavior in Utah or at the University of Utah? That's very interesting to me. But who knows? Emotional disruption, anxiety, lack of motivation, difficulty functioning well. So if, this can definitely happen in a college campus, especially when it's post-COVID. It's the first year that they are on campus together, all together in close proximity. There's a lot of personalities, there's a lot of history, and you're in school, you have your grades, there's money involved, you have to pay rent, there's a fraternity, there's people who are in Greek life, no longer in Greek life, being with people who are Greek. Those underlying causes can cause people to have a severe amount of stress that can build up if they don't have the tools to know how to handle that. And it was interesting to learn that Kaylee was not living there. We don't know exactly when, but she was not living there at the house at the time, which maybe she was seeing those signs. And from my own personal experience, working in the medical field, you just see this also. It can take a few days to develop, and it can take a few months to develop. School started in August, and this happened in November. Just working in the medical field, patients that we have, you could see after surgery, they're in a room in a hotel, in a hospital that is one bed. Sometimes they have to have a roommate. It's close proximity. It's stressful. They are under anesthesia. They're taking pain medicine, other medications. They're not moving around like they used to. They're in pain. They have a hard time going to the bathroom. They're dehydrated. There's so many factors that can lead, and not sleeping well. They're getting up, being woken up for vital signs, and there's bells and there's whistles. That is going to disturb some people more than others. And we could see them going into a psychosis because they're not getting that sleep and they're not getting well hydrated. And so when we see that, we don't say to ourselves, oh, they must be bipolar, or they must be going under, they're exasperating in their bipolarism or schizophrenia. No, we make sure that their ADLs are taken care of. So I just kind of wanted to go through that. So back to the article here. And psychotic symptoms and psychiatric symptoms are present in a minority of mass school murderers, but are common in such cases than among mass murderers in general. So they say sometimes they take their own life, but that's more when they use the automatic weapons. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for listening.
A disturbing discovery for students in the University of Idaho's Greek system over the weekend. Moscow police are searching for the person responsible for leaving coyote carcasses on their doorsteps. KXY4's Drew Reed's working for you with who could be responsible.
For the second time in 3 weeks, students at University of Idaho were left with an unsettling discovery. Dead coyotes were left at the doors of several sororities and fraternities, including here at Pi Kappa Phi.
We're really, unsure why that was happening, but we got rid of it.
Moscow police say on January 20th, a student left a coyote carcass at a sorority as part of a drunken dare. It's still unclear if this incident is related.
We don't have enough information right now as to who actually committed it, so we don't know if it's a continuation of the prank or someone else doing something.
The president of this fraternity says these coyote killings were pretty gruesome. The coyote's body was mangled, and he says the sorority across the street got it even worse.
He says at Pi Beta Phi, there was more blood on the doorstep, even smeared on a window. Police say it appears the coyotes were shot, which is not illegal in Idaho.
In the state of Idaho, all you need is a hunting license. You don't need a tag or anything like that, and you can hunt on public land.
Now, students left baffled as to who could be responsible.
It was just really, I guess, interesting because I thought it was just a one-time thing that happened a couple weeks ago with someone, but now that it happened a couple times, I definitely think it was something unusual.
Police say placing these carcasses is a misdemeanor crime punishable by a $100 fine.
We do have a person of interest. We're still interviewing our first suspect to see if he has any connection to these other 4.
Now people who live at this fraternity want whoever is doing this to know they aren't amused.
It might just be like someone thinks it's a funny prank, but it is quite a serious thing.
Was this dog butchered by the same person who slaughtered the 4 college students? Buddy, a mini Australian shepherd, was found skinned and mutilated 3 weeks before the murders. The dog's distraught owners live just 3 miles from the house where the gruesome stabbings took place. I spoke with noted criminal profiler Dr. Casey Jordan. Could there be a connection between this mutilated dog and these murders?
Yes, we do look at that kind of behavior. The torturing of animals, the experimentation of knives on other living creatures often precedes this kind of attack.
I did want to say a few words about the victim because my area is much more in the victim area. We don't have a lot of information, but the one tiny bit I could find is the agents would always profile from the risk level of the victim and the risk level of the offender. From the risk level of the victim, it would be very low if you just take the crime scene. They were in bed sleeping, whereas the risk level to the offender, it was not too high because it was night and the victims were sleeping, so he had a lot of control over them. However, 2 of the victims worked. I didn't get where they worked, but that would raise their kind of social status where other people knew them. So
I believe it was a Greek restaurant in town.
Okay, but at least other people would know them, when they go in for that. So that would be something to, if you're trying to look at the possibility that there's been some surveillance, some stalking, whatever, of the victims, that would increase the possibility. So were there certain people that outside maybe asked to have them as waitresses or something? I mean, that might be an area that they get into. Mm-hmm. The other point I wanted to make that we learned from the serial killer study is that some of these offenders, and maybe Gary or Jeff can comment on this, would go into these at night, would go into wherever the crime was going to be committed and get very, very familiar. Go around the rooms, get very familiar with things and so forth. We've seen enough of that. So could there have been some of that going on ahead of time? We do know evidently that there had been it was a quote a party house, but that evidently that night there was not a party that I have seen any information on. People came in afterwards, but not before. It sounds like they all came home. The other interesting point is could he access that first floor where the other 2 students were, or would he have had to come in and go into the separate door? That would be interesting to know whether he just omitted them, whether he got tired, whether he didn't know they were there. I mean, a number of things to look at. Those are just some of the other points I
think that's an excellent.
Yeah, and you reminded me of something. I know that they're looking for, what they should be looking for in the residence is anything missing, because a lot of times they'll take a souvenir, and it might be something like just a driver's license that has the picture on it. So right. Those, I'm hoping that they're looking for that. The problem is you have to have people that know what the victims had to know that if it was missing.
Right, like a hunter's trophy or something that this person. Yes, because I really think for this person, this day was like the way most of us would remember, like the day we got married or had kids or something. It was like the day they became themselves in their own eyes, that kind of thing. So of course you'd expect a person like that to keep mementos and things. I mean, remember, about half of mass murderers commit suicide. And I always wondered why. Is it because after they've emoted, they see themselves covered in blood and realize that they're probably going to go to jail or something, or they realize there are dead people around them and they have a moment of insight? What is that about? Was that the plan from the beginning, an expression of annihilation or something? It's possible that we're also looking at somebody who committed suicide. But that's much more common when the weapon used in a mass murder is a gun. When you use anything else, you're much less likely to kill yourself, even though the mental illness is the severe mental illness is more likely without the gun. So that's the other question is, what did the guy do to emote or express when the whole thing was over? Was it anticlimactic? And what it sounds like is that this is a person who walked out of there probably covered in blood, or went in with a change of clothes, and probably drove out of there and went home and didn't seem to have any remorse or rethink it or do anything at all, but who was perfectly content with that. And so that gives you a little bit of a clue that this is not somebody who just popped and then went, what am I doing here? Right? So what did you say, Ann? It suggests
a very attractive young woman and a man. Does that raise your antenna at all that, to your point, maybe it's someone who's a scorned individual, someone that had a crush on one of the women, maybe is socially awkward, some other issue. They feel like they were crossed and this is how they get their payback. Is that a possibility?
I think it's certainly a possibility. But, one point I think it would be good to raise is this. When we look at killers, this is true, serial killers especially, that are not overtly sexually motivated, or at least commit acts that might be seen as a sublimated kind of sexual act sometimes, like let's say Son of Sam, or some of these other. What's interesting about these people is that since it's ego that motivates them, it's ego that catches them. So that in other words, one of the things with that type, like for example, if you think about off the top of my head, three not overtly sexual serial killers that were on missions would be like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, right? Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, and the Zodiac Killer, right? No rape, sexual assault, nothing. In all three cases, they wrote letters to the police, and or to people, that is to say, they wrote letters. Why? Because there was this kind of idea of toying intellectually with the idea, you can't catch me, but also to convey what that ego needs to tell the world that they're feeling in the shadows. And the interesting thing about this type of person, if this guy is anything like I think, is that half of the time, you have to imagine a person who half of the time feels like God and half of the time feels like nothing. Are they nothing or are they everything? That's the dilemma.
Yeah, it sounds like me a little bit, Gary.
So the point is, I feel like nothing, and then when I commit this deed, I'm everything. That's why it's interesting when killers like this do things like kill in the dark. Like the serial killer Robert Hansen that used to hunt women in the dark and shoot them in the back. If they turned around and saw him, he was just a small little nothing. But from behind them in the dark, he was everything. So that I think that this is the kind of person who, assaults from the shadows and in the darkness, and because in that he's something bigger than himself. And so what I think is that these are the kind of people that sometimes get drawn out by police activity, by things that are published about them that are not true, by that kind of thing. The person can't tolerate not eventually popping up. And that's the same kind of people, like if you have some kind of public event, memorial event, some kind of thing where you ask the public their opinions on the case, they can't help it. They inveigle themselves in because they have to have complete control over the entire thing. They have to know everything that's going on. And also, and this I think gets right into the work that you did, the serial killer work, that these people with these kind of missions, they often visit the place and fixate on it and come near it over and over again to get that power, that sense of. So now I'm not saying this is a serial killer necessarily, but I think some of those features may be present here. What do you think about that, Ann?